During Donald Trump's 4 years in the White House, the outgoing president struck up rather unique and controversial friendships with world leaders, including North Korean dictator Kim Jongun. The dynamics between the two outlandish personalities led to unprecedented heights in dialogue on denuclearizing the regime, and even a random meetup on the heavily fortified border that splits the two Koreas. Although progress in recent years has stalled over differences in the negotiations. With Joe Biden taking over as US president, it's clear that there won't be a flurry of bromance. Pyongyang has called the president-elect a rabid dog last year, while Biden branded Kim Jongun a thug in recent months. Will the two sides be able to get their nuclear talks back on track, or will it be back to square one? Today, we're joined by Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, a Korea specialist and reader of international relations at King's College London. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
We also connect with Jenny Tang, fellow at Stimson and the deputy director of Stimson's 38 North, which provides policy and technical analysis on North Korea. It's great to have you back.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Now, this question goes to both of you, but let's start with you, Ramon. Now, it's quite clear that North Korea right now isn't exactly high up on Joe Biden's agenda, and quite understandably so, as the Americans are dealing with the global pandemic and economic downturn and some contentious social issues. But of course, we know from experience that North Korea doesn't really take kindly to being forgotten. So once Biden takes office, do you think that North Korea will make sure that his presidency starts with a bang?
I think it will depend on the signs that it gets from the Biden administration before it takes office and in the weeks after taking office. It is true that it is not the top priority, but you could argue that no foreign policy issue, perhaps except China, is a foreign policy priority for the U.S. right now, for the incoming Biden administration. But I do think that there are different channels that the U.S. can use. New York, for example, going through South Korea, letters that it can use to try to reach out to North Korea to call for patience and make clear that even though it is not a priority, a dialogue process might be possible. So I don't think that North Korea will necessarily conduct a test or come in with a bang if it gets the proper signal from the US over the next few weeks and months.
Now, Ramon, the concern is that Donald Trump fired his defense secretary, Mark Esper, and there's still some weeks until Joe Biden takes office in January. Is there a chance that North Korea might initiate anything between that time?
I would be surprised, to be honest. I mean, we know that North Korea is struggling domestically. We know that there are cases of coronavirus. The borders have been shut, and Trump is going to be gone in a few weeks. So I don't think there is any need for North Korea to try to engage with the Trump administration or to try to engage in any provocation that wouldn't be against Trump, really, would be against the incoming Biden administration. So in my view, North Korea will probably keep quiet at the very least until the inauguration of the Biden administration, unless it thinks that the Biden administration is going to come in with a very different approach, for example, isolation. But that doesn't seem the case right now.
And Jenny, we're also very eager to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think North Korea is planning something to make sure that they aren't going to be forgotten by the Biden administration?
I think it would be in their character to not want to be forgotten for too long. But I agree with Dr. Pacheco-Pardo that North Korea right now is watching the signs. What is the Biden administration saying? What are the advisors saying? What are the opportunities there? But North Korea is also very inwardly focused at the same time, leading up to the January party plenum. They're supposed to have a new economic plan. There's a lot of domestic turmoil that they're dealing with as well. So I think the U.S. is probably very low on their list of priorities at the moment. But I do hope that the Biden administration, when it comes in, is thinking about how to multitask and be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, unlike how the Trump administration started 4 years ago. Certainly, you have a lot more seasoned government officials coming in who know what the different roles of the State Department and the Defense Department and the National Security Council are supposed to be. And so that learning curve is not going to be what it was when the Trump administration started. And certainly groundwork is already being done. So while it won't be the highest priority, it should still be functional. And that is the hope, is that the Biden administration can come in and have a team working on North Korea that can provide the right signals and messages to the North Koreans in order to try and keep the door open to diplomacy and signal early that there is an opportunity here to deal with the administration.
Right, and hopefully that will happen, because the North Koreans, when Obama took office, they launched a missile 75 days after the North Koreans launched the missile 75 days after Obama took office, and 23 days after Trump took control of the White House. But, well, right now, so far, as you have both said, that it seems like they're waiting to see what happens, what kind of signals they're getting. And Jenny, North Korea hasn't issued anything about Biden winning the election just yet. I mean, why do you think that is, and what do you think what kind of signs do you think they're waiting for?
Well, I do think the North Koreans are probably still trying to figure out Joe Biden. And I think there's probably still some question in their mind as to what the election result really is because of Trump's contestation of it. So I think until there's really definitive consensus, which there's starting to be, and certainly in the U.S. that already exists, but until that messaging becomes clear, I think probably the North Koreans are still weighing their options here, and are probably not sure what to say quite yet. But I do think, they have been quiet during the last few months, especially on both candidates. And so unlike when Biden first said he was going to run and the rabid dog comments, we haven't heard that from North Korea since then. So certainly I think they do know that they will likely have to deal with the Biden administration. And I think they probably do see some opportunity there, especially since their track record with Trump was also not very good. It was a lot of talk, they got a lot of publicity, but it didn't really result in anything tangible for them either. So I think they probably are trying to figure out what to do next.
Well, we've had some connection issues, it seems, but we've got Ramon back on the phone. Now, many believe that Michelle Flournoy will become Biden's defense secretary, and she said last month that North Korea's nukes are now an issue of risk management. And Susan Rice, who is being touted as the next Secretary of State, said in an op-ed in 2017 that the US could, if it must, tolerate nuclear weapons in North Korea, the same way it tolerated the far greater threat of thousands of Soviet nuclear weapons during the Cold War. Ramon, do you think that it's possible that the Biden administration might not actually push for denuclearization? And if that is the case, then how would this really change the dynamics of their ties and the negotiations?
Well, I think the ultimate goal will remain denuclearization, but I do think that the signs coming from different people connected to the Biden administration or potentially connected to the Biden administration is that they might be looking at an arms control deal to begin with, something more realistic, because we know that North Korea is not going to agree to denuclearization up front. From what we know, North Korea might never agree to denuclearization, but at the very least you can have this first step that would reduce tensions between the U.S. and North Korea, in the Korean Peninsula more generally, and this could actually lead to a more normalized relationship between the two Koreas, but also between the U.S. and North Korea, and this could serve as a stepping stone towards North Korea maybe considering denuclearization. So I think that we are getting positive signs from the U.S. in this respect, that there is more realism. And I think that the Biden administration might be willing to sign an agreement that even though the ultimate goal is denuclearization, has an interim step, which is, for example, arms control.
And Jenny, would you agree with that? Do you think the Biden administration would be pushing for denuclearization, or is it possible that they might take a turn and go another way?
I think given the statements coming out of a lot of Biden's advisors as of late, they do give a little bit of conflicting views on the matter, but I think deep down, the U.S. will continue to push for denuclearization. The question is on what scale, on what time frame that's going to be, and I think there's a much more realistic vision of how that process will run from Biden administration, future Biden administration officials. So I don't think they're going to settle for like an arms control negotiation per se, but I do think they have much more realistic goals as to what can be done in the interim, what are the near-term urgent matters that need to be dealt with, but still working towards denuclearization as an end goal. So there will still be that need to have some level of denuclearization or some kind of technical concession on the North Korean side as well in order to move that process forward.
Well, in terms of getting to the table and actually having the talks, Ramon, it seemed that Kim Jongun preferred having one-on-one talks with the US president. And, well, according to John Bolton's book, he didn't even want President Moon Jae-in chaperoning them. But when would such a meeting come about, do you think? And is Biden more likely to involve more regional players in the discussion?
I think so. I think the op-ed that he published with John Up News a few days ago before the election was very positive in this respect. Obviously, his administration has been talking about working with allies, which is nothing new. I mean, whatever you think about the strategic patience, well, the Obama administration was actually working with his South Korean counterparts. If we go back in time during the six-party talks, obviously South Korea was part of the talks along with the U.S. So this wouldn't be surprising that you have an incoming, more normal, so to speak, U.S. administration willing to work with South Korea on Korean Peninsula matters. I also think that if you look at the names coming out that could potentially join a Biden administration, many of them have experience in dealing with allies, including South Korea. They have served in previous administrations. They have their contacts from when they were working, for example, under Obama or even before. So they don't have to meet, so to speak, the South Korean government because they have already met the people who are currently serving in the South Korean government. So from this perspective, I think that we can expect more coordination. And I think that the reaction from the Moon government immediately dispatching Foreign Minister Kang to Washington to meet with potential appointees of the Biden administration suggests that South Korea is also going to take care of the alliance, trying to make sure that there is cooperation from the beginning, really.
Right, so in Seoul, of course, our top diplomats are working very nimbly to make sure that process is smooth. But, well, Jenny, of course, there was some progress in improving ties between the United States and the North, including the post-summit declarations between President Donald Trump and Kim Jongun that commit to denuclearization, and they also committed to returning the bodies of fallen US soldiers back to America, as well as including some political statements to improve relations between the two Koreas. Do you think Joe Biden will build upon those agreements and the trust that was established during Trump's presidency, or do you think he's going to maybe disregard these and, as some fear, return to Obama's strategic patience mode, I suppose?
Well, the hope is, it's hard to say, but the hope is that that he won't simply throw away everything that Trump did. And Trump did make some inroads into US-DPRK relations. So, for instance, preserving the Singapore Joint Declaration would be a good start. It provides an agenda, provides direction as to the kinds of issues that need to be dealt with if we really want the relationship to change and if we really want North Korea to go down that road. So we do hope that that opportunity is still there. It would be a great basis to continue diplomacy rather than starting from ground zero. But at the same time, you know, I think it's realistic that it's realistic to think that it's going to take a lot more to get a meeting between the two leaders. It won't be, you know, impromptu summits. It won't be meet me at the border. You know, that we will see a revert back to a more traditional diplomatic process where the meeting between the leaders is not the negotiation itself, but the sort of period at the end of a sentence, right? So, you know, there's going to be a great push to get back to working level meetings, to get really serious about negotiations again and try and get the hard work done before you have the pomp and circumstance of a summit.
And President Moon Jae-in says he'll do his best to ensure that there's no gap in the Korean peace process, and that he projected some optimism that the Biden administration could offer some new opportunities to improve inter-Korean ties. What kind of opportunities do you think he has in mind, and what do you think he'll really have to do in the coming weeks to make sure that the new US government and the North don't really get off on the wrong foot?
Well, I would imagine that considering the situation right now with the coronavirus, tourism that was being talked about is out of the question between the two Koreas. So I would imagine we're thinking more about aid. There is discussion, for example, about providing an aid package to North Korea, also as a confidence-building measure as a result of the coronavirus crisis that is isolating the country. I think potentially we could go back to the idea that we had a couple of years ago about rebuilding North Korean infrastructure. Of course, this is contingent on sanctions relief, or at the very least sanctions exemptions. So I would imagine that the South Korean government is going to be pressing for these exemptions pretty soon, really. And if it's not able to get them, at the very least, it's going to be preparing for them. What I do think, though, is that North Korea might want more. I think North Korea, a few months ago, before the summer, when it blew up the Quezon liaison office, it was trying to show displeasure with the lack of progress in inter-Korean relations. So I think this is why the South Korean government is going to try to, not to press the Biden administration, but to ask the Biden administration for signs that it is going to be willing to allow some inter-Korean cooperation. The other issue would be, are we going to have more family reunions? I think with the current situation with the coronavirus, this is extremely unlikely. And I think that even before the coronavirus struck earlier this year, we saw that North Korea was not very willing really to allow these family reunions. But I think this is something that the South Korean government should be pressing for, because this is a humanitarian issue. And I think that this is something that at least they will try to bring to the table.
And Jenny, what are your thoughts on this? What role do you think President Moon Jae-in should play to ensure that the US and the North, their ties don't go back to square one?
Well, I think South Korea is still obviously in a very difficult position here. There's no lack of will to revive the inter-Korean process, to cooperate with North Korea on a wide variety of issues, including COVID-19. But unfortunately for the North Koreans, the will is not there. The promises that were made in the summits over the past few years have really lacked in implementation. And so unless South Korea can start to move forward on that inter-Korean agenda, and especially on the economic side of the inter-Korean agenda, the North Koreans are likely to continue to rebuff those overtures. So I think, there's an opportunity here in the Biden administration's focus on rebuilding alliances and rebuilding confidence in alliances, and trying to get better coordination and better understanding between the US and South Korea as to what South Korea really needs to do in order to get back in the game. And I think, the administration, the new administration coming in, if they're willing to work with the South Koreans to provide them enough space to be able to get back into, good graces with the North Koreans and get that door back open again, I think then can be useful in the process. But until then, I think it's really just keeping pressure on the US to make sure that this issue doesn't fall to the wayside. So, the more that South Korea cares about inter-Korean relations, the more US has to pay attention as well. And so I think that will be the key going forward, is if there is a sense that North Korea has really fallen down in that priority list, to keep the pressure on Washington to bring it back up.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to leave the discussion today. But that was Ramon Pacheco-Pardo, Reader of International Relations at King's College London, and Jenny Town Fellow at Stimson and the Deputy Director of Stimson's 38 North. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching.